So welcome everyone to this FWR event, delivering multiple benefits from nature-based solutions. This event has been organised by the Foundation for Water Research, or FWR, and FWR is an independent community of professionals from across the water sector and related scientific specialisms, and the community comes together for deliberative discussion to support the development of interdisciplinary solutions to water challenges. This panel discussion today brings together experts on nature-based solutions to discuss how they can support a healthy and resilient water environment whilst delivering multiple benefits for people and nature. Each speaker will provide a short presentation exploring their views and experience on the role of nature-based solutions in delivering multiple benefits, and will explore how these can be delivered in practice. We will then move into a panel discussion where you will have the opportunity to ask your own questions. You can submit these at any point during the presentations. You can just pop them in the Q&A button, which you should see near the bottom of your screen. And if your question is for a particular panelist, please do specify this in the question so I can direct it to the right person. Once we get started, I will also share a link to the free FWR mailing list for anyone interested in staying in the loop on some of our work. And it means that you can also see any upcoming events that we have as well. Without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker for today, and that's Leela Stewart-Roberts. Leela is the Programme Coordinator of the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative at the University of Oxford, where she facilitates interdisciplinary research on how nature-based solutions can support thriving human and ecological communities. She also manages the global map of best practice NBS case studies from around the world and leads communications for this initiative. Thank you so much, Leela. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Ethne, and it's great to be here. I'll just get my slides up now. Could you confirm that you can see everything?
Yes, we can see them. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. As Ethne mentioned, I'm Leela Stewart-Roberts and I work at the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, and we're an interdisciplinary research team based in the University of Oxford Smith School of Enterprise and Environment, as well as the biology department. And as we're here today to discuss how nature-based solutions can deliver multiple benefits, I thought it would be helpful to start right at the beginning with some of the background and framing around nature-based solutions and why the guidelines and principles for NBS are so key to enabling them to bring multiple benefits. So apologies in advance if any of this is already very familiar to you. Hopefully it'll be helpful context for the rest of the session. So nature-based solutions really rose in prominence as an umbrella concept over the last couple of decades. And this is against the backdrop of our failure to address interlinked crises of biodiversity loss, climate change, food security, and inequality. And the United Nations Environment Assembly managed to unilaterally agree and adopt this definition of nature-based solutions in 2022, which I'm not going to read out right now because it's very long. But the important thing to note here is that it includes a range of actions, a range of ecosystems, and importantly for this session, a range of benefits, both human well-being, ecosystem service, resilience, and biodiversity benefits. And here at the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, we work with this slightly simpler definition of working with and enhancing nature as part of nature to address societal goals, providing local benefits for biodiversity and people. And the key thing to really note here is that biodiversity and people are always at the heart of nature-based solutions if they are done well. And they're both an outcome of nature-based solutions as well as a precondition to their success. So when it comes to guidelines for ensuring that nature-based solutions can bring multiple benefits, biodiversity and people need to be at the heart of this, as is shown in this diagram here. And the problem that we often see is that many projects labeled as nature-based solutions don't always center biodiversity and people. And as a result, there have been some serious concerns about their misuse, for example, for greenwashing and land grabs. So in response to these concerns, some of the foundational research that was done by our group, led by Professor Natalie Seddon, focused on really setting out these solid guiding principles and best practice guidelines in order for nature-based solutions to provide sustainable benefits to society. And as you can see here, these were set out in the Global Change Biology paper on the right of the screen. And broadly, these involve nature-based solutions not being a substitute for the rapid phase out of fossil fuels, which was against backlash of many tree planting schemes which were used for greenwashing to avoid decarbonisation. Nature-based solutions involve protection, restoration, management of a wide range of ecosystems, both natural and semi-natural. They're designed, implemented, managed, and monitored by or in partnership with Indigenous peoples and local communities. And for those communities, at the very least, respect their rights, and you would hope champion their rights as well. And then finally, nature-based solutions support or enhance biodiversity. So as we can see from the definition of what a nature-based solution is, if we implement nature-based solutions with these guidelines, then they're really an opportunity to bring together and tackle multiple challenges synergistically. And we desperately need projects which tackle multiple challenges together because we have limited resources with which to do so. We have, importantly, very limited land as well. And if we take a systems lens, we also recognize that these challenges we're facing are all interconnected. So if we just focus on one at a time, then we risk not only causing trade-offs, but also missing opportunities to actually tackle each challenge more effectively and better in a holistic manner than if we were trying to tackle them in isolation. So nature-based solutions can bring multiple benefits, but this depends on various enabling factors. Now, please take this list with a pinch of salt. It's something I've put together mostly just for the purpose of our discussion here today. And based on our research group discussions, it's not by any means an exhaustive list, but some ideas of enabling factors might be policies which encourage synergies right from the global level all the way down to the local. For example, at the top level, currently there's a lot of work on joint work programs between the 3 Rio conventions on desertification, climate change, and biodiversity. Also, funding structures which enable nature-based solutions to have multiple priorities by incentivizing multiple goals. An important feature of these is often their length of time. If projects have a quick turnaround time, often they can't focus on meaningful local engagement and community consultation. And then that brings us on to the next potential enabling factor of community engagement and, importantly, capacity building. Also designing for multiple benefits right from the outset of projects, which means bringing in interdisciplinary teams across social sciences, economics, equity and justice. And then finally, making sure that the monitoring or the progress of the project also recognizes these multiple benefits. So the project's success is being monitored against multiple benefits through a multifaceted monitoring approach. And it's of course important to recognize when we're talking about enabling factors that the nature-based solutions are highly place-based. So while the key principles that guide them can be translated across geographies, the enabling factors needed are always very dependent on local context. And the question of who is responsible for these enabling factors also differs. So that's the intro to nature-based solutions, and up to this point it's all been quite high level and abstract. I'm now going to try and illustrate some of these themes with a case study, and this is one from our platform, which is one of our key resources. So this is an interactive map of best practice case studies from around the world. And for example, you can filter by ecosystem, and I've filtered by wetland and freshwater. These are some examples that are on there: the River of Life wetland restoration in the River Thames just south of Oxford, peatland restoration in Ireland, and river restoration for natural flood management in Ellison Water in the Scottish borders. We're going to look in a bit more detail now at the River of Life case study. So quick background context to the case study is in 1950, sections of the River Thames were declared biologically dead due to water pollution. The river was also seeing a long-term decline in fish species, and the surrounding area was largely species-poor pasture land. So in 2010, the project implementers, the Earth Trust, acquired a stretch of 35 hectares along the River Thames, with the goal to transform the land into a wetland landscape. And they partnered with the Environment Agency to implement the project. The intervention itself took the form of both hard landscaping to create habitat areas like ponds, backwaters, reed beds, as well as habitat creation of actually replanting reed beds, planting wet woodland, and restoring grassland. And if we then look at some of the different outcomes which came from this project, they take there are multiple benefits here. So they've monitored that the biodiversity increased for various different biodiversity action plan habitats, which also boosted the fish species because there were more nursery grounds in the area, and also improved local connectivity with the conservation areas surrounding. On the public access and engagement side, there was improved recreational access throughout the wetland area linked with the Thames footpath. And then the project implementation itself also made the most of community engagement through volunteering opportunities, and then also guided walks and school environment education programs. And then if we look to the ecosystem side of things, the project created an additional flood storage capacity of 34,600 cubic meters within the flood zone, which helps alleviate flooding further downstream. The project, there's a lot of uncertainty around wetland creation and how it impacts climate mitigation. So the project is monitoring greenhouse gas fluxes in order to fill these knowledge gaps and understand more about the outcome of wetland restoration for carbon sequestration. And then finally, the project also is monitoring the increase in water quality as a result. And the project led to improvements in water quality by slowing and filtering water flow. So this hopefully helps to illustrate what some of these guidelines and principles can look like in practice. And then if we go back to think about these enabling factors, we can think about how these might have played a role in enabling multiple benefits. And again, these are just some ideas I've brainstormed. I'd be very happy to discuss further and hear about other ideas of enabling factors. But for this case study, for example, with funding structures, the funding came through a diversity of sources, with a bulk funding from the Environment Agency, but also additional funding from the Trust supporters and various other awards, including the BIFA award as the project progressed. Community involvement was also a key feature of the project, from the very consultation during the planning phase right through to implementation and then monitoring and management afterwards. And there were multiple objectives embedded in the project from the beginning. Biodiversity increase was a core objective, but they also were already thinking about access and engagement and other ecosystem service provision. And finally, the outcome of the project was monitored against these various different indicators of success, from ecological to social, economic, and ecosystem service provision. So I hope this has been helpful as some background and context to how nature-based solutions can enable multiple benefits. There's just some key high-level takeaways here. I'm looking forward to hearing the other presentations and very happy to answer any questions in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leela. That was brilliant and great to hear about a kind of case study example, and some of your thoughts of being part of the NBS initiative. So thank you so much. And to all our attendees, please do put your questions for Leela in the Q&A box. I'm going to carry straight on now with our next presenter. So I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Mark Everard. Mark has been working on ecosystem services and the concepts leading up to the formulation of that term since the late 1970s. His background is in aquatic sciences, but this has morphed into the wider systemic implications of the societal benefits of nature and the vulnerability of nature to society in a range of roles in science, policy, practical implementation, and broadcasting in the UK and Europe, Africa, East Asia, and Australia. Mark, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah. Apologies, I seem to be dropping in and out, so someone shout at me if I'm not visible. But here goes. I'm going to start off with some very high-level thinking here, because why not? But I'm going to fly through because we're all intelligent people. We all understand the ecosystem services framework, what nature's done for us in the provisioning, the regulating, the cultural and supporting. What is often poorly represented in practice is the fact that everything is interconnected, as Leela has been saying. The reality is all services are part of the system. So the ecosystem produces functions, which produces the services, which produces the benefits, and we regulate and we decide and we run an economy on tiny subsets, and yet we undermine the system as a whole by being fractional. So the way we use the land surface, the sea, the earth's crust, forests, tends to be for narrow provisioning services, undermining the wealth of other services. Very, very rapidly running through this. We tend to cherry pick ecosystem services. We say, well, we need the water, we need the energy. So using a traffic light scoring or representation, yes, all good. We get the water, we got the energy, but we undermine the other provisioning services, the regulating services, cultural services, supporting services, resulting in systemic breakdown. Now, this is important because nature-based solutions must have nature at the base. It might sound obvious, but we run the risk of cherry picking, just maximizing one service whilst overlooking ramifications for the system. So the systemic overview is the singular most important thing. Looking at the way we manage wastewater back in the day, I suspect many of us on this call could design a treatment work on the back of a fag packet in 5 minutes, because we only looked at one thing, which was water quality, the sanitary determinants. Well, then we got worried about climate change, so we thought about carbon sequestration, carbon capture and storage. Again, a one-trick pony, and that produces multiple other problems. So that was our old paradigm, just looking at single disciplines and causing an order of magnitude more problem in fixing it. The first wave of nature-based solutions, sort of represented by this, what we tend to call reeds in a box wetland solution, is really the same thing. It's just using green stuff to do brown stuff work with a singular ecosystem service outcome, in this case, water purification. But there's no hydrological connection. There's no social connection to this fenced system. So if we were to audit that against, is it acting as an ecosystem or is it just a technology with some green fluff on top? It's not far along that line from single discipline to multidiscipline. Contrast that with the ICW, Integrated Constructed Wetland type approach in Ireland, amongst many other places now, where things are designed deliberately as systemic solutions, multiple services, multiple benefits, and avoiding disbenefits. Believe it or not, this paper was 12 years ago, which is difficult to believe. But ICWs are designed to optimize across ecosystem services, not maximize single services, overlooking others. And these systems in the Anne Valley here, but other places, work at village scale, house scale, industrial scale, farm scale, with no fences, because they offer amenity. People go there, have their sandwiches. They support biodiversity, including on this November day, getting stung by a wasp. I remember that well, as well as hydrological buffering, nutrient cycling, carbon sequestration, and all gravity driven, so no energy chemical input. Now, that's a really good example of deliberately designed for multifunctionality, and you can access the paper there if you wish. It's so effective that some of the farmers that use it on their farms actually use the lower cells of the wetlands for fishery. They get revenue out of fishing. The Anne Valley in the middle of the town, their bottom ICW cell is a communal swimming pond because the water quality standard is drinking water quality. And there's been massive ecological restoration of what was formerly a largely dead river, with repopulation with salmon, otters, and so forth. So this is very much working with nature, but looking at nature as the provider of the full chunk of services, We see this obviously with managed realignment. Back in the day, we valued food production in the Second World War period, and we didn't really value what the ecosystem did, so we fenced it off. But with sea level rise, maintaining defences became indefensible, and that drove thinking about setting back the defences with some loss of farmed land, but then valuing energy dissipation, flood storage, carbon sequestration, and other services. So a good example there of multi-beneficial ecosystem service-based. Likewise, green infrastructure, and I realize I'm flying here because of time, we tended to maximize the built bit of the built environment, unsustainably, developing without regard to ecosystems, and then bringing in benefits of ecosystem services from out with. But contemporary thinking, if not contemporary practice, is looking at retaining or emulating ecosystem services within the built environment, bendy lines rather than fixed ones, to try to bring services in situ. Been involved in South Africa in some urban design. Now, that does mean that we need robust and practicable ways of assessing ecosystem services, both the benefits and the co-benefits, disbenefits. Through the Ramsar Commission, which I do a fair bit of work with, there's been a decadal commitment that ecosystem services should be assessed. And yet when we looked a few years ago, very, very few had been assessed. Wetlands had been assessed. Why not? Because the tools didn't work, because they weren't systemic. Many kind of highlighted, well, they're the important services, and therefore they weren't systemic. They overlooked the system. They looked at single value systems, generally monetizable or regulatory outcomes. They were slow and expensive to produce, and they relied on technical data, overlooking other forms of knowledge, with the outputs often summative, e.g. a net US dollar value. So we devised, Rob McInnes devised the RAWS approach, rapid assessment of wetland ecosystem services, Ramsar, to make it tractable. It's fully systemic. It assesses all ecosystem services. It integrates multiple forms of knowledge, technical, observational, local. It is rapid, reducible, and reproducible and cheap. It assesses the likelihood of impacts rather than spuriously accurate quantification. So you've got a tabular output, better supporting management decisions than that monolithic US dollar output. And there are many applications. I mean, just some of them: assessment of the current state of a wetland or other ecosystems, ex post assessment, ex ante assessment, what if game playing to optimize innovation. And RAWS is now used widely around the world. I just looked in Google Scholar before coming online, with a global spread of about 6,000 reports on Google Scholar. But importantly, it's not just about wetlands. It's used for built environments, deserts, mountains, because it's based on what Rob and I have been doing for 20 odd years before Ramsar asked us for a wetland specific. So we regret putting W in the title, to be quite honest. But it does support nature-based approaches because it looks to ways to optimize co-benefits and disbenefits. I mean, this really matters because we live in a really parlous time where we're living with seriously depleted ecosystems and rising human demands. And we have to reconceptualize what we think of as sustainable development. We live with massively depleted life support systems that are continuing to degrade. Nature-based solutions can help us rebuild the earth, as I put it in this book. The old mantra of treading lighter on the earth is just so not going to get us out of jail. We need to rebuild the degraded systems. And nature-based approaches are generically vital, not just for flood, not just for the obvious green things, but in all policy areas, which I do address in this book. And it's important then we have these pragmatic tools for mainstreaming nature-based thinking, far from nice to have, niche, but actually into the mainstream of all policy areas. To elevate this minimalist vision of sustainable development, it's not about being less crap tomorrow, which is my normal sort of strapline on it, but actually how can we address this policy goal in ways that nature supports, and we rebuild nature as the capacity to develop it on a multifunctional basis. So bringing mainstream nature-based assessment into all policy areas. that's my very rapid overview there. And yeah, I'm here for questions later.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Mark. That was a brilliant overview, kind of linking together some of those key concepts of ecosystem services, nature-based solutions, and sustainable development as well. So I'm sure there'll be lots of great questions for you, and a reminder to all our attendees to put them in. Thank you very much. I'll now pass over to our next speaker, Dr. Gabby Dotro. Gabby is chair of the Constructed Wetland Association and founder of NBS Future, delivering expert services that bridge conventional and nature-based water treatment expertise. With 20 years of experience translating innovation into practical implementation, she currently leads strategic consulting projects for UK water utilities and regulators while maintaining academic links as visiting fellow at Cranfield University. Thank you so much, Gabby. Over to you.
Thank you, Ethne. Well, what what a background. Those were brilliant presentations, and I've been taking notes, and hopefully you can see the links into what we're all saying today. So I'm going to take you to multiple benefits when you're using nature-based solutions in wastewater management or treatment. And I'm pleased that Mark introduced some of that as well. So you get to see linkages with the two previous presenters here. And rather than look at enablers, what I've done is bring some images and discussion points for us to then proceed with the panel. So nature-based solutions for water management, that includes wastewater management. And I'd be remiss if I don't mention that Ofwat has funded a multi-million project called Mainstreaming Nature-Based Solutions that is UK-based. And it's looking specifically at how to move them from being niche or nice to have to mainstream. And I was pleased when the team decided to adopt the IUCN definition of NBS, and they've now recently published a description, a note on the categories that are available that fit the definition of NBS for water management, and how you can that fit the definition and how you can implement them. So there's a list of all the different applications, either for wastewater treatment or for other natural flood management, for example, so other applications of NBS. And they also have currently open for consultation and common value framework. And this goes to what Mark was saying about tools to quantify those benefits. And what this is trying to do is something UK-wide so that it doesn't depend on who's doing the assessment of your proposed intervention. You always get a reliable, quantifiable benefit from doing that. And the other tool I'll briefly flag up, this was developed by one of the many European projects on nature-based solutions. This is not for what tool, and this lists you a list of nature-based solutions that you can use for water management. You can have a list, you can look at a scenario, and it will help you guide you to choose what are the most suitable options for your particular situation. And they have fact sheets for all of the different interventions. They tell you what they're good for, what are the co-benefits that you can derive with this, and what are the operational constraints. So what do you need? Somebody was putting in the chat about land, for example, availability. So what do you need to be able to implement one of these things? And then they have fact sheets for all of these example of biofilm-based technologies. There's also attached growth technologies as well. Suspended growth technologies as well, sorry. But the key thing is that when you're talking about NBS for wastewater treatment, they all have the main goal of water quality improvement. And then you can derive these co-benefits. But if you're not achieving the main goal of treatment, then it's not really the NBS for wastewater treatment. So main goal is treatment, co-benefits, you can have a raft of them. And there's evidence on all of these that I've listed here, but obviously I have 10 minutes, so I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to highlight a few examples of how they can be incorporated into the design and how you can actually, how you can mess that up. So this is the first one that I thought was really interesting, which is about biodiversity. And Mark was showing a picture of a reed bed or a subsurface flow wetland. And these are technologies that have been in the UK for 4 decades and have been used for wastewater treatment within the water industry. And they're typically designed, like Mark said, for a single purpose: improve water quality. The reality is, if you take a look at the biodiversity benefit they provide, is quite significant. So I'm bringing here a couple of studies that have been done in these treatment reed beds when they looked at treatment reed beds And this study on, well, my right-hand side is on comparison between treatment and natural reed beds that are of similar size and in the same similar area, so similar region where they're located. And they looked at different indicators of biodiversity. And what we find is that these treatment reed beds, even though they were not designed for biodiversity, they're still providing good habitat that is comparable and is sometimes better than the natural ecosystem of equal size. And that's what happens if you don't even try, if you do it with purpose. So if you have biodiversity as one of the co-benefits you want from the get-go, then you get much better. So these are some examples from surface flow wetlands that have been installed in the UK in the past 6-7 years. So we did a study last year on looking at 3 surface flow wetlands that had been designed for nutrient capture, but also for biodiversity benefits. And what we did is apply the DEFRA biodiversity net gain tool, and we found significant benefits achieved in terms of habitat quality that is provided by these systems when compared with the baseline. And we did a sensitivity analysis to see, if the baseline actually, because we did this retrospectively, if the baseline was really good, do we still deliver a benefit? And the answer is yes. The baseline was actually poor, then that biodiversity benefit is much higher. And the BNG tool has been used for other treatment wetlands that are designed for nutrient capture. And even though these are not linked, so Mark was talking about systems that are not lined, so you can link them hydrologically to the environment. These are all isolated because they're treatment systems. So you want to keep the pollution inside that basin. They still provide other benefits despite their limitations or their semi-natural state. And this is a site in Luston that has achieved an 180% biodiversity increase. So that's biodiversity. The other thing that I found really interesting is amenity. So the cultural services, amenity and educational value. And I love this wetland from the States. It's massive, 485 hectares. So imagine building that in the UK. So that's a human for scale. So this was designed for polishing the effluent of an energy-intensive gray technology. But it was designed as a park. So this is open to the public. This has platforms for viewing. It has everything that you like. And the important thing is that they're actually measuring the benefits. So they record their visitor numbers. They also record how many people they reach through outreach programs. So when you have training, forest schools, that kind of thing, they record how much this is used and providing that educational value. You can see a dip there when people were allowed near the system during COVID years, but you can see how that quickly recovered as soon as you're allowing people back in. Now that's massive, but we don't need to go that scale. You can go with something smaller. This is an urban wastewater treatment wetland or reed bed in France, where you can walk right next to it, and it's treating the wastewater from the building next to it. It's providing biodiversity benefits. It's providing mental health benefits to the area. So there are ways of doing this, and it doesn't have to be massive. You just have to have purpose. Now, I would love to say this is the reality now because we've grown as a species and it happens everywhere, but it doesn't. So I thought it'd be interesting to bring some missed opportunities examples. And that image I took when I carried my reusable bottle. I drank all my water on the train. I went, oh, it's okay. And I can refill it at the train station. And then actually, no. And I had to buy bottled water, which I hate. It shouldn't exist. So yes, what happens when we miss opportunities? Well, we're not fit for purpose. This is when we apply what I call gray asset thinking. So we have an NBS, we fence it off, we have it hidden away from view, and in some cases, we don't even bother to put any plants on top of your wetlands. So that is a no-no. But that sadly still happens very much in the UK. The other thing that I wanted to raise is when you are planning from the start, as Lila was saying, when you are planning for these multiple benefits from the get-go, you need to consider what's compatible. And I brought here some 2 examples. One is an example of an in-stream wetland that was built to improve the water quality of a river. It's all dotted along the river. The river was restored as well, so it was made more squiggly and all that fun stuff. And the idea is that we're going to generate a water quality benefit, but also a biodiversity benefit. Now, the reality is, and I don't know if you can see it in the picture, dog walkers love the area, and the dogs, oh my God, they enjoy huddling in that wetland so much that it's completely destroyed the vegetation next to it, protecting the wetland. And obviously, when the dog goes in, all the sediments go crazy. So in terms of water quality improvement in that particular area, not great. In terms of biodiversity benefit in that area, not great. But what do you do? So one of the principles from the IUCN global standard is adaptive management. And in this case, the owner had to decide, what do they do? Do you fence it off and therefore limit the amenity value that the system has? Or do you accept that in this part of the wetland, you're not going to get that much treatment, you're not going to get that much biodiversity benefit, but you are providing other benefits, a cultural benefit? And that's what the owner did in this case. But it's about thinking and learning as you go along. The other one that I brought here is an operational trade-off. And I would love to tell you that everything in terms of when you're looking at ecosystem for wastewater treatment is in sync. And if you optimize something, it's going to work for everything else. That's not the reality. So this is an example of when you harvest the plants to remove some of the nutrients, how that can impact on greenhouse gas emissions from that system, process emissions. So if I were to harvest when it's good, where I can get the most nutrients out of my system before it's being released back into the water column, I would generate a lot more methane than if I harvest in winter when there's less methane convection. So you can look at the study if you're interested, but that's an operational trade-off. And that's one of the things that you need to look at. So what's more important to me for this system? Is it the small amount of nutrient that I can remove from the system by harvesting, or is it about reducing my carbon footprint as much as I can from the system? So some of these things are in competition and you need to be aware of that. So to sum up, what I want to say is that the potential for multiple benefits, even in wastewater treatment, is real, it's quantifiable, and it has been demonstrated. There are a number of case studies. Feel free to drop me a line if you need more of how this can be achieved. We need to move away from gray asset thinking, as I call it, to realize these multiple co-benefits. And you need to be aware of the how some co-benefits may be more or less compatible with other uses. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gabby. That was brilliant, and great to hear about an example of kind of the use of MBS being implemented for a specific function around wastewater treatment. So thank you so much for that. And I know our next speaker, Joff, is also going to be touching on this. So thank you so much. I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Joff Edeveen. Joff is a past freshwater biologist with 30 years of industry experience in wastewater treatment and environmental regulation, currently focusing on the reduction and treatment of storm overflows, nature-based solutions, and catchment approaches. I'll just get your slides up for you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so thanks for the opportunity to chat here. Really interested to see what the other speakers have talked about today. And often in a water company environment, we have to make lots of compromises on what shape and form our nature-based solution looks like. Often we're limited by land, and that can drive the type of solution we want to do, and also security issues. So people have talked about access. So like, do we have a completely off-site wetland, or do we have to have one within the confines of the rest of the works, which means we can't really let people run around because there are moving machinery pieces and sludge wells and things like that people could get themselves into trouble with. Anyway, next slide, please, Stephanie. So, okay, what you've got here is basically what was our plan going into this investment period. So we are looking at wetlands to do nutrient removal for final effluent treatment for phosphorus, but basically one of the main reasons we want to do them is to treat storm overflows, particularly where we have high spilling sites where you may have heard this term of dry day spills. Basically where we have chalk. So we've got, chalk down in the southeast, so Wessex and Thames and Anglia also have these issues. We get groundwater infiltration of our network. So we get groundwater coming in under pressure through joints in our pipes, which means the system gets overloaded and we go to storm when it may not have actually rained for many weeks or months. So we have a two-pronged attack on this. Where we have this is that we try and seal our sewers to get the groundwater out of the system, but if we can't get it all out, we wanted to deliver 11 wetlands to treat storm overflows generated by groundwater infiltration in AMP8 and 25 in AMP9. That's where we started off. And this would really help us to achieve the government storm overflow reduction plan targets. So we're not actually going to reduce the overflows, although we will do a little bit by sealing, but where we can't actually get rid of all the groundwater, then we treat it to a standard that's agreed with the Environment Agency before it's returned to the environment. So often we will base that treatment standard on what the final effluent limits are for the normal part of the treatment stream that deals with the dry weather flows. And we've had lots of success in what we call our Pan Parish project, which is in northwest Andover, and Singleton, which is north of Chichester, where we used to have a lot of disruption with overflows going to local rivers and causing low-level pollution there because it's a very dilute effluent. And we've sealed a lot of sewers there and really reduced the overflows in those areas, and also reduced the amount of tanker movements and over pumping and temporary treatment that we used to have in these villages, which are very disturbing to local communities. Next slide, please. So part one of the approach is to try and control at source. And if we can control at source, then we don't get to build a wetland, which is not much fun for me because I really want to build wetlands. But if we don't have to build one, I'll take that as a sign of success as well. So we can reline our pipework to stop the infiltration in, but also what we found is that you really have to seal private pipework as well, because each house or each property or building, school, factory, whatever it may be, will have a private lateral sewer connected to our main sewer. And if we don't seal that, then we really are wasting our time, because what happens is the groundwater might not be able to get into our public sewer, but it will just go into the next easiest route. It will go into the private sewer. And we call it the whack-a-mole game that you may have seen at the fair, where you whack a mole on the head and then it pops up somewhere else, and you're just chasing the groundwater. So you've got to seal the whole system. We had quite a lot of kickback from our economic regulator offer on that at first, and who said, why are you spending money on assets that you don't own? And then we had to explain that yes, that was true, but if we didn't do that, we would spend the money on tankering and over pumping in the catchment. So it was better to control it at source so we could avoid those costs. And they said, oh yes, that sounds logical. We'll work with you to find a way that how we can fund these projects in the future. So that was great. And then we can sort of monitor these systems, and often we look at temperature difference. So you probably know that domestic sewage is actually quite warm. It's like 13 or 14 degrees, but in chalk streams, the temperature is about 10 degrees of infiltration. So we look in that temperature differentiation and look at groundwater levels and the level of our sewer in relation to groundwater levels to decide what sewers we need to seal. So basically, we won't seal any sewers that are above historic groundwater levels, because it's a waste of customers' money and it's not going to provide any benefit. So we try and seal those that are below groundwater levels. And then step 4 is, if we can't get all the infiltration out, then let's treat it after it's passed through a storm tank. So that was the ambition for AMP8 and AMP9. Next slide, please. Okay, so when you come to build a wetland, what are some of the challenges? Well, I'm going to read off a list here, and many of you will go, yeah, that's obvious, but I think it's worth just going through them. So land availability is one. Often we do have land available, but often we don't. So we have to purchase that land. And land is much more expensive than it used to be when I started doing wetlands about 8-9 years ago, because there are a lot more opportunities out there for a landowner. They could use that land for BNG credits, biodiversity net gain. nutrient credits, carbon credits, and often, you know, they know that you want to do this on that area of land, and they're close to the work. So there's a kind of bit of a ransom strip approach sometimes from landowners, in that you're going to have to pay over the odds of the land price because we know you want to do it here, because we're right by our sewage works. So credits can be an opportunity, because actually the water company could maybe do something with those credits in terms of BNG offsetting for our capital program, but it can be a barrier. So a bit of a double-edged sword there, credits. Just for example, biodiversity net gain costs at one of our wetlands we're trying to do at St Helens. We actually own the piece of land. We put this piece of land out to grazing for someone who'd been grazing it for 20 years. No insecticides, no pesticides, no chemicals put on it for 20 years. The result is you have a very high distinctive lowland grassland there that actually, when you come to build a wetland on it, you've got to make a lot of allowance for biodiversity net gain credits and replacing those credits somewhere else. So at St Helens, that was quite a large cost that actually made us look at more conventional grey solutions. We are still going ahead with the wetland, hopefully, but it did make us think twice and think, oh, should we do something else? So yeah, BNG, I think it's a great thing, absolutely a brilliant thing, but there's always some unintended consequences of the legislation. And I've heard, talking to colleagues about, you know, flood schemes and things like that, where managed retreat schemes, they've really had to go and look at the costs and benefits again when you take into account BNG, and sometimes it has meant they've gone back to a grey solution. So BNG, again, it can work either way for you. And then common to a lot of projects, but because you're doing on a bigger scale, because wetlands are a bigger land intake, there's lots of environmental screening. So all the favourites, newts, tree preservation orders, and I've put in there things like in unexploded ordnance, you know, are there any bombs there? A lot of our old sites are situated near old airfields, which were targets for bombing in the war, or perhaps, you know, a crashed aircraft of our own. Then there's archaeology things, flooding. Often your treatment works, but with good reason, is by a river, because that's where it gravitates out, the final effluent out to the river. But, you know, also could it be on a floodplain? So, you know, there are lots of challenges around flood risk assessments and things like that. And then the other challenge that's come forward, and I've got a separate slide on this, is regulated challenges. But before I go on to that slide, when I first wrote this slide about 2 or 3 months ago, we were in the middle of a task and finish group with the agency, and we still are in the middle of that, but it's progressed. So some of the things I've said, I just want to give a little bit of an update on where we are with things, thanks to working with DEFRA and the EA. So next slide, please. Okay. Actually, just while we do this slide, I was saying that you know, you'll look at all different types of depending on what land you've got available. The picture on the right is actually of an aerated wetland we've put in at Lavant Treatment Works near Chichester. Now, aeration is, you know, we've actually made an energy intensive process there, but we've also got a wetland, and that's because basically that's the area of land we had available. So if we had lots more area of land available, we would have done a nice free water surface wetland, but you have to work with what you've got. So basically what we did there is we basically used an old tank and an old wetland that was there and converted it into an aerated wetland. So not the best for BNG and all the rest of it, but still better than building lots of storage tanks that you're forever filling up and trying to empty. So back to the regulatory challenges, though. So I think it's fair to say that DEFRA and the EA need to see confidence in wetland performance in compliance with secondary treatment definition of the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. And that's fair enough. There are a lot of NGO pressures going, you know, do these things work? Do they comply with legislation? So we had to go through some trial criteria for some wetlands that we wanted to do. And basically, when I said we want to do about 30 odd over the next 2 AMPs, we still want to do those. But at the moment, we've got a potential of maximum of 4 trials due to the criteria that were set for the trials. So there are lots of criteria, but the highlights would be, for example, we can't have wetlands in the trial that discharge to either a bathing water or shellfish water. So that has put the St Helens wetland project that I was talking about, the BNG for on the Isle of Wight, that's put that on hold. So we're going through planning with it, but we'll have to shelve the design until after the trials. And hopefully the trials will show that we get the right efficacy and we can build the wetland. Also, and this is something Gabby touched on, is, gas monitoring, methane emissions, carbon dioxide emissions, nitrogen oxide. How are those things really looked at with a wetland, and what contribution or not are they making as a carbon sink? So this is one of the things that has slightly changed, is that the agency have said that's now a kind of a voluntary part. It's not a mandatory part of the challenge of the trial. So we kind of challenged that and said, okay, absolutely, I think we need to look at things, but that should not hold the trial back. So we may still work with the agency on that, but that position has changed. Many of you may have heard of urban pollution monitoring requirements. What's happened here is that the agency have said, if you're building a wetland to reduce storm overflows or as a proxy for storage or treatment of storm overflows, then you must ensure your effluent complies with UPM fundamental intermittent standards, which some of you may hear referred to as FIS standards. So again, that's another challenge. We've had to revisit our designs to make sure that they fit with that, and there will have to be a lot of work to build a UPM model itself. Often we're working in really small catchments where we haven't got all the information that we would have on a big catchment, so we're having to build sewer network models, which all takes time. So with all these challenges, we said to the regulators, it'd be really good to have a task and finish group so we can talk through these things. And I've mentioned a couple of movements on that already. We've also commissioned an independent paper, which Gabby very much helps us with, of wetlands being used across Europe to treat storm overflows, exactly for the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive in many cases. So we've submitted that to the agency and they've gone away and reviewed that. And we're also having a new UPWER project, so UK Water Industry Research Project, to look at historic data and performance of wetlands that are out there already, which have either increased, being used to increase the full flow treatment at a works, or used to treat effluent from storm tanks. So that's been a really good group, and the next slide will hopefully give you a bit of an update on where we are with that and our view of that. So this is the industry view. So one of the trials criteria was the urban wastewater treatment, you must meet percentage removal requirements. And we said, well, the directive doesn't actually say that. The regulation says it has to be an and/or. You can either meet a concentration or a percentage removal. And we said to the EA, where does it say you can choose one or the other? So we haven't seen that, but the latest from the agency is that where we can show that a conventional stream may be on the same site, so maybe you have a conventional filter works process and a side stream wetland process to treat storm overflows, where that conventional process doesn't meet percentage removal of the urban waste because the sewage is so dilute, then maybe the wetland doesn't have to either. So meeting a concentration, relatively easy, but if you start off with a very weak effluent, meeting percentage removal requirements of 70% and above for BOD is quite onerous. So we have seen some flex on that, so that's great. So that's sort of kind of an update since I've read these slides, prepared these slides. We also were a bit concerned that MBS trials were not being treated on a level playing field, because when we do conventional processes, we don't have to have these onerous trials. And we also linked in with this is the third bullet about full flow to treatment. If we want to treat more than the full flow to treatment in a permit, stated in the permit, what is the problem with that? So that, again, this has changed by working with the regulators. The view on this has changed as well. It's been sort of phrased in a different way, is that basically if we use where we want to increase full flow to treatment as a proxy for treating more flow to eliminate storm overflows, then whether you have a conventional treatment process to do that, such as a trickling filter works, submerged aerated filter, or whatever you're going to use, you will have to be looking at these urban wastewater treatment directives and FIS standards. So whatever solution you do, if you're increasing the FFT to reduce storm overflows, then all types of technology must meet the standards. So we have got a more level playing field. So that's good. We also just discussed that UPNs really aren't for storm discharges, really are for storm discharges only, not for increases in FFT. But then what I just said applies. The EA saying, yes, but where you're increasing FFT to eliminate storm overflows, then it will apply. So this is the good thing about working together, is you start seeing where the other person's coming from, and you go, yeah, okay, I can see that now. I couldn't really see it when it was just black and white in the trials, but I can see that. And we've tweaked the kind of guidance around it with the agency to reflect that. And we also said that, if we used a nature-based solution and it didn't reach the limits, then we would actually just replace it with something that does, like we would do with the conventional final effluent system. So a final effluent treatment system. So there have been lots of concerns about what if it doesn't work? Well, if it doesn't work, we put something else in that does. So with all these trial requirements, we were concerned that we had to start these trials by 2028, that we wouldn't actually be able to start the trials before 2028. But because of the work of the Task and Finish group and the bit of the flex on the UPM standards, and also that the requirements to build those UPM models will be, kind of bit more of a best endeavours. Let's do what we can instead of doing the full-blown sewer network model that might take a couple of years. The EA will take a sort of realistic view on that. So that's really good, because what both sides don't want to do is miss the window to start the trials, which leads on to the next bullet point. If we did miss that window for the trials, and the trials have to run for 5 years, then we still won't be able to use these storm overflow approaches, not only in AMP8 in this current investment period, but potentially we might miss the boat for planning for AMP9 as well. And it also means our storm overflow reduction plan targets, which everyone wants to see us hit, at risk. So again, there's been a lot more pragmatism working with the regulators. We're in a much better place now to do that. And kind of we did think, hold on, there's not much guidance on this, and we thought, maybe you're making it up as you go along, but that was another reason to do the TAF. So we do that together. So we are very much working on this guidance and regulations together. So everyone wants to do this, because the agency and DEFRA do want to see these solutions, but they have to have confidence, when scrutinised by other stakeholders and NGOs, that they are going to produce the outcomes for the environment, and we understand that. And just the last sort of point is that we actually have been using this approach for many years. Particularly Severn Trent have used side stream processes of wetlands to treat storm overflows, but that was before the days of the storm overflow reduction in 2023. So 2023, really, it's reset the way that the agency look at full flow to treatment, and the way their attitude to storm overflows, that they must not have a negative environmental impact on the watercourse. So although we have built these things in the past, the kind of new storm overflow regulation has kind of trumped those previous approaches. And what you perhaps did 10 years ago, you might not be able to do now, or you might have to meet a different set of criteria to do that. So it's all good stuff, and we've worked really well on it. I think that's my last slide, but I better just check. If it can go to the next slide. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joff. That was really interesting and great to hear the kind of industry perspective and how it's been working with the Environment Agency and DEFRA on those projects. So thank you so much for that. Without further ado, we'll move on to our final speaker for today before the panel discussion, and a reminder to put your questions in the Q&A box for Joff and Gabby as well. So I'm really pleased to introduce Angus Middleton. Angus has been a director of environmental consultancies for 20 years, working on natural capital since 2013. He has frequently partnered with multidisciplinary professionals, academics, policymakers, and communities to deliver successful nature-based projects. Angus was recently a member of the Innovation Advisory Board for NERC and helped create the Natural Capital Protocol. Angus has led Viridian to win many prestigious prizes for their innovative creation of new methods and tools to model, specify, and quantify nature-based solutions. Angus, over to you.
Right, thanks, Anthony. And hello, everyone. So I'm Angus Middleton from a company called Viridian Logic. We specialize in optimizing landscapes and projects for nature-based solutions, ecosystem services, natural capital, whichever buzzword is your favorite. And our kind of USP is water. So it is that sort of optimizing landscapes, prioritizing the best things to do, I guess, to reduce flooding, drought, sewers overflows, water quality, all those sorts of things around water. But then also considering all the other multi-benefits as well, trying to get that sort of complete systems thinking that Mark was talking about. And actually, Leela's Garum project, we did some modeling on that around sort of water nature-based solutions. But today I'm going to be talking about SUDS Plus, which is a DEFRA FCRIT flooding and coastal resilience innovation program. One of their projects, about 25 of them, I think, that lasts for about 5 years. And SUDS Plus is based up in County Durham in a place called South Stanley. And what we're trying to do with SUDS Plus is turn everything upside down. So rather than looking at flooding in this case, because it's not on the coast, and adding in co-benefits, the whole flooding thing is just what I'd call a foundation benefit. So you don't really see it. It's not really thought about very much, but it does underpin everything else. And it's actually the co-benefits which are the targets. Everyone's thinking almost entirely about the co-benefits, but we make sure there's flooding in there as well, that we are reducing flooding of mainly the sewers and people's houses, but also the rivers a little bit. And this is the approach we've taken is to try and get not just consultation, but real co-design with the local community. So a lot of going out to the community, trying to get their ideas, what they want to do, what they want to see in their community. That's the real keystone to this. And this has not been an easy process. What we've done is first of all try to work out what the vision should be. So what do people really need in this community? And South Stanley is really quite deprived. It really is poor on all the indicators of deprivation, educational attainment, income, antisocial behaviour in the community. It's a tough place. So the things that came out top, for the most important things to the local community were employment, better housing and lower cost of living, training opportunities, be that green skills or other things, and then a sense of place or a nicer environment in which to live. So those are the sort of the overarching thing, aspirations of the local community. And then for different sites, to looking a little bit more closely about how we might attain that. Things like edible suds, bins, seating, wildflowers, playgrounds, and better health. So walking routes and exercise areas, and some community gatherings areas as well for multiple activities. So that's what the local community said they wanted. And in the consultation process, we first of all had 383 locations that the community wanted to see stuff happen in. And there was all sorts of competing requirements. Some people did want certain things in certain places and others didn't want those exact things in those exact places. And it was all, there was a lot of information to take in and to analyze. So I went through a lot of social science frameworks and activities on the left there, so we're going through a lot of modeling and a lot of decision frameworks. to get down to 12 sites, which is the main image here. So these 12 sites around South Stanley where they had a bit of a chance of reducing flooding, but it's what the local community wanted to see happening in these locations. They wanted to see improvements to these specific sites along the criteria I've just been mentioning. But we had to get flooding in here somehow. It is a flood resilience program after all. So we tried our hydrologist modeling system at Viridian, and this is really used mostly in rural landscapes. And the idea is it's not binary. It gives lots of options, but it ranks everything you can do in a catchment for the amount of impact it will have on local problems. So it's not just opportunity mapping, it is taking into consideration all the interactions across the landscape and all the flows, and a lot of the systems thinking stuff's going in here. And it ranks in this, what you can do where for the amount of impact on flooding, nitrates, phosphates, sediment, drought, whatever it is we're looking at. And we make these, in rural areas, you make these heat maps on the left there, and then some of the sort of specific action maps on the right. And in rural areas, this is really quite simple for landowners and communities to understand. On that image on the left there, the darker the color, the better it is to do something in that location. The more it will reduce flooding if you create a woodland or a wetland, depending on whether it's green or blue. And that's, farmers understand this. They understand this field's great for growing corn and that one's rubbish at growing corn. So it's easy for them to see how one field or part of a field might be great for reducing flooding in the local town or not. But that's much harder when you get into an urban setting, because it's really hard to understand all the connectivities and why doing stuff in one street might benefit those that live many streets away. And it's quite a difficult concept to get across. So the blue here was our prioritization modeling for SUDS intervention in the town here in South Stanley, and the darker blue, doing stuff in those locations will have a bigger impact, both for the sewers, but also for individual houses that flood. And the red dots there are the sites that the local community want to see stuff done, want to see these parks or pocket parks or green areas improved. But the problem is, it's quite hard to sort of see how one affects the other. So you can maybe add in the houses that do flood or have been modelled that probably will flood, and then the community observations of where flooding has happened, and then overland flows. And you get to this, it's like, oh God, it's so confusing. No one can understand it, let alone the local community who are not experts in this sort of thing with maps at all. So this was a no-go. So we had to kind of, how are we going to get this message across? Really tricky. This idea of SUDS, floods, houses, prioritization, all that kind of stuff. So we scrapped it. What we tried next was this idea of areas. So the idea of this, and I'll bring up with the houses that flood. The idea here is any one block color doing SUDS in that block will affect other houses within that block. So if you do stuff in the pink area up there on the top left, SUDS in that pink area will benefit those red houses in that pink area. And same in the yellow, blue, green. But of course, this is all flowing downhill to sort of towards the bottom left. So actually, a lot of these colors overlie other colors. So the yellow is on top of the purple and the pink's on top of the purple. So if you do things in the pink, it also affects or benefits all the properties in the purple areas, which are also overlain by the yellow and the green and the blue. So this is also really complex actually when it boils down to it. It seemed like a simple idea to start with, but the local communities were just not getting it. Really difficult to explain in a coherent way. I think probably most people listen to this are fairly confused. I get fairly confused, and I put it together. So how do we get sort of this idea of something that's really technical into stuff that communities just want them, the wildflowers, the park benches, the better place to play in? So we came up with this kind of two-pronged approach. On the top left there, it's the community voting. So that's the community voting on all of the things they want to see. So it's benefits and disbenefits. Antisocial behavior. If you make a park really nice, will the kids come and play with it and leave loads of cans around and make lots of noise? So it's a real benefit because the kids can play in the park, but it's a disbenefit if maybe you're a bit older and live right next to the park, and it can be quite frightening. So the community voted on what they wanted, and we had quite a good turnout after a long and very uphill struggle getting to that point. And those are the scores, see, from 26 down to sort of -12 for each of the sites, the 24 sites we were considering. And then we separately put in the flooding ourselves. So we scored each site for sort of a need and opportunity, basically, on what nature-based solutions, what SUDs on that site could do, either flooding on that site or nearby. So it was all the sort of the ways nature-based solutions, SUDs on that site could be beneficial. So all of the sites were given this not only community benefit, but then a flooding needs and opportunity score. And we blended those together to get down to just 4 sites that we could really focus on. And then for those 4 sites, we looked at the communities, designing them individually, really sort of helping them with a co-design. So it was a bit of technical input, but really trying to get the communities to say what they wanted to happen in a very specific way on each of those sites. We knew that it would all benefit flooding, so we're kind of good to go, really. Although, you know, bins and benches, not so much. And this was done through fairs, through schools, through all sorts of things, but also through this Future Fox digital design app, where it is very easy, sort of drag and drop for each of these sites, and you get this for the progress and benefit there. It almost gamifies it, so you can see the benefit for people, for nature, and the cost, so you don't just sort of fill the whole thing up and blow the budget straight away. So there was quite a nice sort of gamification aspect to that. People quite enjoyed it, and we could embed some of the in the people score some flooding in there as well, so we could sort of tinker with the scorings to make sure we were considering flooding, even though, again, it's that foundational thing. It wasn't really talked about, particularly with the community, because they generally weren't very interested. So this approach has some challenges, I think it's fair to say, associated with that. The biggest one was getting people to engage, getting people to actually give their time, give their energy towards us. And the level of deprivation does not help that in South Stanley. I think it's always a problem with most projects. The fact this is trying to be a co-design, we're trying to get to the point actually where we can create a toolbox that communities can do everything themselves. They can start, they can vision it, they can design it, deliver it, and maintain it, and actually earn money to do that, to pay people locally to do that, and the skills training that's needed and stuff. We haven't got there yet. It's proving quite challenging. And things like getting in non-physical benefits, health and well-being, those sorts of things, you know, community cohesion. How do you measure that? How do you get people to sort of talk about it? It can be quite difficult. Timing. Often you need to get the local authority. In South Stanley, all the land's owned by the local authority that we're doing stuff on. So we really need to get the different departments engaged at the right moments for their cycles. And that's been difficult. Scale can be tricky. People really think about towns on their own guard and their own street, maybe their own slightly wider neighborhood, but trying to think about the whole town is much trickier, especially when maybe putting a load of trees near your house will benefit people a long way away, reduce their flooding. That's quite hard to get people to think about. But there are lots and lots of benefits to this approach as well. The big ones, I think, are really trying to get this multiple benefits in here. So this wider resilience, improving the lives of people that live in these communities. Flooding being just a part of that. It's the underpinning maybe, and it has a lot of the funding can maybe come through that. but shouldn't be the focus, because that's often not what most people in community want. So we need to, so it can bring in all this kind of different sustainability ideas, whether it's community sustainability and cohesion, or financial, or environmental, climate. It can bring that all together and go across silos. Because it's kind of community led and driven, it gives it longevity. They want these things, and they're willing, at least in theory, or some people are willing to help out with them. And if we get to the point where people are paid to look after them, then that's financially and commercially sort of long lasting as well. So it should be able to just carry on going. But we're not quite hesitant. We're not quite there yet, but at least we're getting to the point where people want these in their local community. They're really for it, rather than putting up obstacles, which helps with all the planning and going through regulatory approvals, and hopefully the longevity as well. So not a silver bullet, but it's actually at the moment it's looking pretty good. Hopefully we will we'll get that whole finance thing, that last piece in the jigsaw, and then we'll have it cracked. We can make our toolbox for future rollout. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Angus. Really interesting to hear about the different way of viewing nature-based solutions and thinking about those kind of the co-benefits first, if that makes sense. So that was really brilliant to hear about. Thank you. We're going to kick straight off into the panel discussion. I know Leela has to leave very shortly. So I might just start, if possible, if you don't mind, Leela, with a question that's left for you before you have to run off, which is, how do you and your team determine which geographical areas or communities are most suitable for implementing nature-based solutions? Are there some kind of criteria or frameworks which help guide the selection process?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ethne, and it's been so interesting listening to the other presentations as well. So thank you, everyone. So in response to Holly's question, I guess the simplest way to answer this is to really reinforce that nature-based solutions are an umbrella concept. So many different types of projects and interventions can come under that, which means that there aren't really specific geographical areas or communities which are most suitable for implementing nature-based solutions. And it's more, as Angus was just explaining, with that interesting case study, finding out what a particular area really needs and how you can match that with other benefits, whether that's flooding or storm protection through a mangrove restoration project in small islands, or producing food through agroforestry projects. So I'm sorry if that's not a simple answer to the question, but I think nature-based solutions can't really be copy pasted to different places. So it's also a good thing, because it means that there's some way of working with nature to bring these benefits in pretty much every geographical area or community. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much, Leela. That was amazing. And thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. I think that Leela raises a really good point as well, which I think would be good to kind of carry on with the rest of the panel, which is some previous discussions we've had around NBS at FWR have talked about the role of standards for nature-based solutions. And given how kind of context-specific NBS needs to be, especially when you're considering things like NBS with multiple benefits, what role do you think standards have in supporting their implementation at scale? And I wonder, Gabby, if you maybe have some views on this, as you kind of talked about some examples that you'd used on that website.
Hold on. I think Geoff was gonna jump on that one, because that's one of the key things that mainstreaming nature-based solutions is trying to address. So these are the program of work, which is, I think it's 4 or 5 years, 5 years, I think it is looking at regulatory barriers, and also standardization is one of the key work streams on that program. So yes, there are ways of creating standards that can be used across different contexts. So it doesn't mean that you're creating a one-size-fits-all MBS solution, well, MBS application or intervention, it means that you have a set of principles that need to be met. And if you look at the IUCN global standard for nature-based solutions, they have 8 criteria that you need to meet, and they have a number of indicators that go with that. So in terms of standardization, there's quite a bit out there already. And then specific for the UK, mainstreaming MBS is currently looking at that. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
That's really useful. Thank you. Oh, Angus, I can see you wanted to come in on this one.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it's almost you can't let perfect be the enemy of good on this. There has to be pragmatic, because otherwise things just take forever and get bogged down and cost far too much. So things like the BNG thing and the volumetric water accounting, which is kind of an international thing for water replenishment. These sort of, as Gary was saying, these frameworks which sort of tell you what you've got to achieve without telling you exactly how to do it in some ways. I mean, BNG is a little bit more guided, and it's not ideal, but it's still, there is room there for professional interpretation, and sort of you can do more or less, and you still have to go out and do things. It's just, as long as you've got the evidence, you can then translate that back into a standard unit that everyone can understand. And there's actually a thing called the Flood Action Group we're working on at the moment. We're trying to do that with flooding. So, can we get sort of meter cube equivalent? If a nature-based solution's in a great location and well connected and it's storing lots of water, that's a great thing. And if it's in a bad part of the catchment, because it's not connected to the river, then storing a lot of water is not going to help. So it's those sorts of concepts, but it's very difficult to be, you can't be too precise or too nailed down about exactly what you do and how you got to do it, because everything's different. But I think we do need frameworks and guidances and sort of these standards, just so everyone believes, understands, and is happy.
Thanks, Angus. Joff?
Yeah, just picking up there on the point about, you can't always aim for perfection. I mean, at the moment, the way the regulations work is if I've got a storm overflow that's spilling less time, 10 times a year, then really it's okay for me to put settled sewage straight into a river. But what we want to do is put a wetland in, so all overflows are treated to a good standard. But it might not be, due to constraints, land constraints, and all the rest of it, we might not be able to meet the gold standards, the UPM FIS 99 percentile standards, whatever we want to look at. So the discussion has to be is, okay, do we do nothing then, or do we do what we can?
Great, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question now, just in the interest of time. And I can see that, Mark, you've indicated you keen to answer this one, so I'm going to come to you first. Sorry to cut the question down a little bit, but it's from an attendee who's worked on numerous flood relief schemes, many of which occur along important watercourses. And when they've attempted to broach the concept of incorporating natural solutions to manage water flow, and when they've outlined the benefits, engineers and project managers have turned down any suggestions. So do you have any suggestions as to how I could or can better sell the idea of natural solutions when working with these people?
That's from Jeff Heen, right?
Yes.
The Irish context. The ICWs have their genesis in County Waterford in Ireland and are widely taken up in that part of Ireland right the way through to Dublin. And there's lots of examples all over. If you go to the paper in my presentation linked to the Everard and McInnes paper, it links to a lot of the literature, including cost-benefit stuff, and how it relates to nutrients, hydrology, water quality, and all the rest of it. So there's an evidence base there, Jeff, that you can pick up, well documented in peer-reviewed literature, and I just go and stick it up their noses, frankly. This works. Get over yourself and your fixed assumptions about how you do these things.
Thank you, Mark. Any other views from the panel around how you can kind of sell the idea of natural solutions? Evidence is obviously absolutely key. Gabby?
Yes. Okay. So if you are less frontal in the conflict, I suggest that first you try to understand what's the perceived issue with the natural or the more natural solution. So sometimes it's about evidence, like with regulators and this misconception that we haven't done this before. I don't know. There's no evidence in the world, and actually, no. Here's the evidence, and that's where providing that could change somebody's mind. Other times it has nothing to do with evidence. So it's understanding what are the actual barriers. What's the issue here? Many years ago, thankfully, this has mostly changed now, thanks to the widespread use of nature-based solutions as a phrase. But many years ago, every time you tried to sell a wetland or a reed bed, you were told no, and the reality was because it wasn't making the consultants any money. It wasn't about they don't work. It wasn't about they're not the right solution. It's about I'm not going to make money of that. Oh, look, now there's a lot of people making money of this. So it's a different situation. And it had nothing to do with presenting the evidence. It has to do with you need to understand what is it that it's blocking them. So is it about education? Is it about presenting the information, or is it about understanding what's the driver? What is it that they're trying to achieve? That it's saying no flat out to your solution. That would be my more conciliatory mark. Obviously, I'm all for shoving people's evidence up people's nose, but there's another approach as well if you're feeling more soft.
Thanks, Gabby. Angus? Oh, sorry. Just did you have your hand up or?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it's actually it's very possible to model quantify the benefits that nature-based solutions give to flooding specifically, but then you also the drought or water quality as well. There's lots of tools out there, things like Scalgo, Safer Places are quite good at that. But yeah, there's lots of ways to do that if that's the problem.
Thank you. And Mark, sorry, we're running out of time a little bit, so if you give a snappy answer to this one, which is, could you talk us through how the RAWS assessment is applied in practice? For example, what kinds of data and expertise are typically needed to carry out an assessment?
Okay, this one's from Holly, I've seen. Well, there's some guidance there. Put your email address in the chat. I'll send this to you. Here's the form. The technical information might be for global climate change regulation. There might be scientific analysis. The observational, oh, I can see a hydropower station. So there's energy extraction from the system. Local knowledge, spiritual and religious values, very difficult. We were doing an assessment on Sri Lankan wetlands when we were doing the Sri Lankan wetland policy, did our RAWS assessment, found a guy farming it, and he said, oh yeah, we farm to the Buddhist calendar. So suddenly what for us was a provisioning service thing opened up this whole world of spirituality. So using local knowledge really matters. That's how you fill it out. And then you get to like food, well, you can quantify some of it. But when we were working on the Yellow Sea assessment, we talked to people, oh yeah, we harvest the shellfish at low tide. So there's different types. So you need to integrate these types of knowledge. That gives you your scoring of plus, 0, minus, and God knows, two predetermined thresholds. So you fill things out and you document your evidence so it's replicable. And that gives you then a sense of where the benefits are at spatial scale. And you do that for the whole system. This is systemic. And then your outputs can be just representational. All the pluses are green and the minuses are red. Or you can semi-statistically manipulate. So you can see, for example, where the maximum benefits are, where the potential benefits are being realized or not, where different components of a wetland produce different categories of ecosystem services or benefits across spatial scales. You can develop a functional taxonomy for different types of wetlands, and it goes on and on. So Holly, I'm very happy to send you that that sort of summary, although you can get it from the RAWS documents themselves.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I'm afraid that is actually all we have time for today. I would like firstly to say a massive thank you to our brilliant speakers, Leela, Mark, Gabby, Joff and Angus for your brilliant presentations, and to all of you for posing the questions and attending. I know we could talk about this for hours and hours, and we will be revisiting this at future FWR events. Just quickly to let you know that this event has been recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel and website. And if you are a member of the IES, don't forget to record your attendance on the members area of our website. And if you're not a member, please do consider joining. The next IES event is tomorrow and is a COP30 discussion event focused on adapting to 1.5 degrees, and you can register for this on our website. Thank you once again to all of you. It's been a great event. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.